In this video, I'll be showing you how I assembled the pistons and cylinders that I used in my Porsche 911 2.5 MFI motor build. Okay, here's everything I'm going to be using in the video today. I have my Kimtech wipes and alcohol. Be using that to clean the parts with the latex gloves there. I've got some assembly lube that came with my piston cylinder kit. The brand happens to be Driven brand. I've got my piston rings, my piston, the cylinder is there. I've also pulled out one wrist pin circlip, and then a couple tools to mention here. One is I used a Stomsky Racing circlip injector. I'll show you how to use that in the video. Here's a close-up of that Stomsky Racing circlip injector. So for those of you that have been following along, I'm building a 2.5 MFI motor using my stock 2.4 case. So I wanted to minimize the machining of my case, so I went with a kit from LN Engineering. They make some of the best cylinders that you can buy. This kit is designed to slip right into the existing 2.4 spigot sizes, so I did not need to do any machining there to bump up my displacement to 2.5. The cylinders are beautiful, which you can see here. And with the kit, I opted for the JE pistons. So you can see they're high dome with deep valve recesses. And they're set up for 9.5 to 1 compression ratio. So beautiful looking parts. Okay, so as usual, you want to thoroughly clean all of the parts when you're building a motor. So again, using Kimtech wipes and alcohol, I thoroughly cleaned out the cylinder barrels. I actually, before this video, I spent a little more time washing those out. So I actually used some soap and water, really thoroughly cleaned the inside of those barrels. That was recommended by the manufacturer. So what you see here is really just kind of a final wipe down, as I'm getting prepared to install the piston into that cylinder. So make sure you get those barrels very clean. As far as the pistons go, again, I rub them down, including trying to get inside the channels for the rings. Each of those rings were also wiped down with alcohol. You really, at the end of the day, you just want to make sure everything is clean. There's no debris left over from the machining or manufacturing processes. Any of the tools you're going to use, make sure those tools are also wiped down. So the ring compression pliers that I'm using here, those have all been wiped down and cleaned, as well as that Stomsky circlip injector. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start installing my rings to my pistons. As a reminder, I'm using JE pistons, so these are not stock Porsche pistons or Mall pistons. You want to make sure you're following the manufacturer's instructions for installing the rings. Mine came as a kit, right, from JE. So with my kit, I have the 2 compression rings, and I have 3 rings that make up the oil ring. So there's the main oil ring itself, and then there's a top and a bottom ring, that kind of sandwich that main oil ring. So you want to make sure that you put these in order as specified by the manufacturer on the piston. You want to make sure that you measure the ring gap. I've had already done that prior to this video, so the ring gap was already set and is appropriate for my car. As you're mounting these rings to the piston, you also want to make sure that you're orienting the ring gaps according to, again, the manufacturer's instructions. So as you watch my video, you'll see I'm trying to point out, I'm using the wrist pin center line, and I'm pointing, with each of these rings I'm installing, kind of pointing where that gap is going to be oriented relative to that wrist pin center line. So again, that's the instructions I was given. Make sure you follow yours. And let's see, a final note as well, the compression rings also need to be oriented correctly. There is a specific way that they need to be mounted, and some rings have the tops mounted with a symbol or a marking. Some of them are identified by the edge itself. Like my rings had like a bevel to them, so I knew which way to orient the ring, meaning that beveled corner needed to face up. So a lot of things here to pay close attention to. Okay, so let's get the pistons installed in the cylinders. What I'm pointing out here is the shape difference on the cylinders. The part that's bowed out more or more domed on the cylinder faces down in the motor. Also, looking at the pistons, you can see the different size relief cutouts. The intake is the larger cutout, okay? And the intake part of the piston will face up, okay? So the larger relief cutout, in my case, is going to face up in that cylinder, so opposite that kind of domed shape that I was pointing out on the cylinder. Okay, it's time to install the piston into the cylinder. So in this case, I used Driven brand assembly lube. Again, this came with the kit that I purchased from LN Engineering for my Nickies cylinders and JE pistons. So you want to liberally coat the inside of the cylinder barrels with the assembly lube. Make sure you're getting, again, a liberal amount of coverage all throughout the inner barrels. And then you want to point that down. So go ahead and put it on your workbench with the top of the barrels facing down, so that it'll be ready to take the piston from the skirt end. And grab your piston, same thing. You want to go ahead and use a liberal amount of assembly lube, around the piston, covering the rings, the ring surfaces. And then once you've gotten everything covered nicely with assembly lube, you want to go ahead and grab your compression pliers, your ring compression pliers. Go ahead and coat the inside of the pliers with assembly lube as well. Okay, let's go ahead and install these pistons into these cylinders. So you want to make sure that the piston has the head, the top or the dome portion facing down, right? Because you can see the cylinder itself is also facing down. So we're going to be installing these pistons head facing down. You want to grab the rings with your compression pliers evenly. So what I mean by that is make sure when you install the pliers that you've grabbed all of those rings. You want to grab all the rings evenly. Make sure that they're pinched or compressed evenly. Once you have that done, carry the piston over to the cylinder make sure it's perfectly level, right? So get the piston head very level with the surface of the cylinder, and just lightly push or apply pressure to the piston to go ahead and have it press into the cylinder. Takes a little bit of a feel, a couple tries, and I think you'll get the feel for this, because if you let too much of the tension off of those pliers before the rings have entered the cylinder, they'll spring out. They'll spring out just enough to where they're going to interfere with your ability to push the piston into the cylinder, and you don't want that. You certainly don't want to put too much pressure on these, because you can easily crack one of these rings, and you may crack it and not even know it. You could basically push your piston into the cylinder with a cracked ring. So, it's just gentle pressure as you're pushing and sort of transitioning that piston, through the pliers and into the cylinder. Okay, so once you've got the pistons installed in each of the cylinders, you want to install the right side wrist pin circlips. And you'll see why. When you go to install these onto the motor, you basically cannot get to the right-hand side as you install each of the following pistons. So I'm using the Stomsky Racing circlip injector. There's instructions for how to use this tool on the internet. They have a great video to show how to use it, but it's a two-piece tool, kind of a plunger and then kind of a cylinder piece to it, and the plunger part slips into the cylinder. You basically take one of your circlips, you push it in with a screwdriver, it goes in a slight angle, and then when you use that, you basically take the tool with the circlip inside the tool, you put it up to the area where it needs to go in on top of the wrist pin, and you press it in. That's why they call it an injector. So it's pretty easy to use. I found these circlips to be quite annoying. Even with the tool, it took a number of tries to get them to be flush with the wrist pin, basically popping into the channels within the piston as they need to. But so make sure you wipe down your wrist pins with alcohol and wipes. Make sure they're nice and clean. Clean the circlips. Clean out the tool that you're using, which in my case I did. And go ahead and install those the circlips on the right-hand side of each of the piston cylinder setups. Okay, here's a close-up. You can see the piston is inside the cylinder with none of those rings being exposed. They're all inside the barrel. You can also see a close-up of the wrist pin circlip, right? You can see the wrist pin has been inserted into the piston with the circlip firmly within the channel and flush against that wrist pin. And here's a view looking down inside the cylinder barrels. Looking down at the top of the piston. All right, in the next episode, I'll show you how to install the pistons and cylinders to the motor.